This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Engage. Engage is a digital booking engine revolutionizing the talent booking industry. With hundreds of athletes, entrepreneurs, speakers, and business leaders, Engage is the go-to spot for booking talent for your next event. For more information, please visit letsengage.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. We're so excited and honored to have with us today ESPN host and sports personality, Israel Gutierrez. Welcome to the Impact Podcast, Israel.
Hey, thanks, John. I really appreciate it.
Hey, listen, before we get going, I'm a huge fan of yours. I was just telling you off the air. I just finished watching you while I was on the treadmill on Highly Questionable today. I watch you every day if I can on whatever show you're on. But, can you share a little bit of your background, how you even got here before we get going on some of the other things we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So it's actually, it's funny because I tell this story often in terms of how I got into journalism. It really was just because I wanted to be in a class with my older sister in high school. I was a sophomore at the time, it was a sophomore, junior, senior was the only years in high school in the mid 90s over here. But I got into the class and she was a senior and I was a sophomore and I just wanted to be in the same class. We had like similar friends. And by the very next year, I was editor of the yearbook and then, did it a year after that as well. And so it just kind of created that idea of wanting to do something that I just find fun, right? As opposed to my initial thought was trying to be a lawyer.
Right.
And so, went to University of Florida, happen to be wearing my Gator stuff right now.
I see it.
But I went to the University of Florida and majored in journalism and did a lot of freelancing over there for, newspapers and news services around the country or around the state rather. And then got my first job right out of school. They actually called to hire me about a month and a half before I graduated. And I was like, are you sure it's okay that I finish school first? And so they said yes. And so started off at the Palm Beach Post. I covered the Florida Marlins for 1 year. They were the Florida Marlins then. Now they're the Miami Marlins.
Right.
I covered the Miami Heat for 2 seasons for them and then moved over to the Miami Herald, got hired there and was there for 9+ years. I was a Miami Heat beat writer for 6 of those years and then a sports columnist for the other 3+. And so right around 2012, ESPN came calling with just the right job offer. They'd had a couple other offers in the past. Just didn't really fit what I wanted to do. But, NBA columnist is where they sort of got me in. And then it's been sort of a transition over the last 8 years from, doing a lot of writing and a lot of NBA centric to just kind of more general sports talk shows and not writing as much. But, I think currently I'm at a place where I'm going to try to meld all those together and maybe make another adjustment to my career. Let's say.
What do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy the writing or the on-air stuff more?
Well, it's all different, right? I feel like I miss the writing stuff a lot since I haven't been doing it as much. And that's really where you can sort of get in and know, subjects and, sports even or trends where if you're just reacting to them on TV, yeah, you're having a great time. You're talking to friends and, frankly,
Right.
and entertaining people, hopefully. But when you really, get to the nitty gritty and just start doing the reporting and the research and just getting to know the subjects a lot, I think that's probably my favorite, whether it be a TV feature, whether it be a writing feature. I think just getting really personal information from athletes, whoever it is, front office people. I think that's probably my favorite part.
Got it. Well, you're wearing your cutoff shirt today, so this is a fair question because you got the guns out. I mean, dude, wait a second, Israel, is this from a Darwinism point of view? Is this nature or nurture, dude? I mean, because I want your trainer's phone number if this is nurture.
Yeah. You know what it is? I mean, it's definitely not nature. And this is no disrespect to the rest of my family, but we are not an athletic, shredded group, if you will.
Right.
It's definitely a nurture thing. And I was actually a heavy kid growing up. I was like 200 plus, like as a 13-year-old. Yeah. And, you want to get to the psychology of it or what have you. It's probably because I didn't want to look any sort of attractive in any way. And, because I was closeted and, didn't want any attention. And so, or it was just some version of, childhood depression, who the heck knows?
Right.
But I was a bigger kid. And so there was a point, my sophomore year of college specifically was when I decided, hey, I need to, trim down at least, I think I gained, I did the classic freshman 15 and got even heavier. So I was like, all right. And then I trimmed down a lot. And then just over the course of like my 20s, just didn't really have like a motivation, just kind of was eh. And then at one point, I think it was 2008, a friend of mine asked to do a half marathon. And I tried to sign up for it, but it was already filled. And so I signed up for the full marathon. And I pressed send and paid for it. Yeah. I pressed send and paid for it before I could change my mind. And then I trained by myself, having never run even a half marathon. I just trained by myself for several months and did that in 2009. And it was just one of those challenges where I said to myself, wow, like never in my life did I think I could run a marathon. I hated it. I hated the idea of running. But once I did that, I was like, well, there are really no limitations to what I can do. So rather than be jealous of that dude with the 8-pack over there, let me see if I can go get one. And it probably helped that ESPN allowed me the affordability, allowed me to afford a trainer. So it definitely helped, but it's definitely just a lot of work. And if you really want to get into the psychology of it, I don't know how happy I was as a person at the time. So maybe this was sort of me getting out some anger, some disappointment at the time, but hey, it seemed to work out okay. Cause now I just tell people all I want to do is live till I'm 120. So if that means trying to stay in shape, then that's why I'm doing it.
Well, you look amazing. You look super young, and I'm seeing a new trend. I'm 58 years old right now, wow, Israel. And yeah, and my hair, this was like supposed to be winning. But now that I look at your hair, and last week I interviewed Ryan Searant, I'm realizing now all the hot thing is to be like your kind of gray. And now I'm zigging when I'm supposed to be zagging again. I mean, this is
it's so funny. I laugh about this all the time. There are a couple of reasons. One is when I was a kid, my dad, similar hair, but he would dye it all the time. And it would just look terrible. Like, not because, dyed hair looks terrible, but just because he would never pick the same color twice. It would just be like, all of a sudden he looks like me right now. And then the next day it's jet black. And then 3 weeks later, it's like a brown. And so I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and just lean into it. And I used to do it even shorter than this. So you couldn't really fully tell how gray I was. Yeah. But now that I grow it a little bit more, people just ask me all the time if it's my natural hair color. And initially I just started like laughing. I was like, why would anybody dye their hair this color? But apparently it is the thing. So I sort of stumbled into a trend that I am.
Now you're leading the trend. You're leading the trend on TV. It's awesome. I mean,
your hair, by the way, John, not to be your hair looks great. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't know what you do to it, but for 58, you said?
Yeah.
58-year-old head of hair. I'm doing okay. Envious, right there.
I'm doing okay. This was supposed to be winning, but now I see you and I see Ryan Searant, I see Anderson Cooper, and I'm like, I'm not winning anymore. These guys are winning. I mean, but what I love to ask when I've had so many of the great ESPN folks on, Sarah Spain, Shelley Smith, Jessica Mendoza. Now, now with you, who's been your favorite interview in your career? So far.
You know what? That's a great question. And I think it's disappointing my answer right now because the interview has not been aired in any way. And it was an interview I did in 2018 with Billy Beane, the former MLB player. He was, and now he works for MLB. And he was, when I was, in high school in my formative years, that's when he eventually came out, right? And he told, some stories about playing and while being closeted and everything else. And he wrote this great book. And at the time, it was a real tug at me. It was, wow, like this is a Major League Baseball player or a former Major League Baseball player, depending on when you listen to the story. And it's sort of, for the first time that I realized, okay, wow, there's more people like me, perhaps there's representation and there's, while they're closeted and fearful, I'm not alone out there. And so, that was something that I sort of carried with me for a long time. And I definitely followed Billy just because, right? It's not like he continued an athletic career, but he continued to be a presence in the LGBT community. It's also the point to his job title now with MLB. And so I spoke to him in the beginning stages of a project that I was working on, which again is just kind of stalled a little bit, but it's still in the works. And so we sat down in the offices in MLB in New York, New Jersey area, and I don't know what it was. It was just very comforting. It was just, sitting down with somebody, and he didn't know that he had been a kind of, I wouldn't even say mentor, but just kind of like a light, like a guiding light, if you will. And so we sit there and talk, and he didn't know anything about, my fondness of him. And it was just an amazing, amazing interview. And, he cried a little, I cried a little. And I know he went into it not really knowing what we were really going to talk about. And so by the end of it, I had the person I was working with say, hey, I feel like we've maybe taken too much of Billy's time. He thought it was going to be a 20-minute interview. And Billy's just said, no, like this has been, and he's like, took a breath, and this has been great. And so to me, that was, and again, haven't even released anything of it yet, and I will eventually, but it was just, to me, the most just personal and powerful interview that I've been a part of.
Well, I'm so glad. I hope it comes out. I want to watch it. I knew I was interviewing you some weeks back. And whenever I'm interviewing someone who I'm really excited about and really interested in, and they've had a fascinating journey, I'm always working it over in my head weeks in advance, and I'm sure you do the same. I loved your article here, Israel Gutierrez, on taking flight after coming out. This was a great article, and I want to get into that. But last night I was doing some prep work, and I was for this interview, and I read one of the most interesting stories I've read in a long time. It was today's New York Times on Glenn Burke. No one can say I didn't make it. And it was, I got to tell you, Israel, it was semi heartbreaking because it talked about his struggle, his journey, dying of AIDS in 95, which is only a mere 26 years ago, but almost seems like forever ago. And definitely in terms of where we've come in society, maybe a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
And I love the line here. No one could say I didn't make it. He said, I played in the World Series. I'm in the book, and they can't take that away from me. Not ever. And
John, you're really just touching on a really just a soft spot for me, because actually the Burke family is one of the people, or one of the several people that I interviewed for this project that I'm working on. And to hear the story, and for those who don't know, Glenn Burke was a Major League Baseball player who played for basically just the Dodgers and A's. And he was effectively the first openly gay baseball player, because while he wasn't public about it, wasn't sending anything in the media or what have you, he was in his own locker room openly gay, in his own clubhouse openly gay. And there's a lot to this story, and I won't, bog you down with all of the details, but some of them, being that they believed that the reason he was traded from the Dodgers to the A's, and mind you, this was a player who retroactively was compared to Rickey Henderson, which is funny because Rickey Henderson essentially replaced him in Oakland. There were people saying that he was the greatest baseball player they'd seen. They called him, he was effectively the Michael Jordan. And I'm not just talking about in baseball. He was the Michael Jordan of the Bay Area at the time. Like whenever people would show up at pickup games in basketball, they would want to play against Glenn Burke because he was the greatest player out there. And part of the reason, supposedly, according to his family and according to Glenn, he told that he was traded was because he ran into some LA Dodgers executives in a gay bar. And that's how they found out he was gay. And that's how they found out that he knew that they were gay. And then soon thereafter, he was traded to Oakland. And, there's a lot of history, and you can look it up on Tommy Lasorda and his relationship with his child, who was openly gay. And he was a player for Tommy Lasorda and is actually friends with Lasorda's son. And again, it was mostly mistreatment and just get him away, despite being a great player. And then in Oakland, you had his manager, Billy Martin, at the time. And can I use expletives?
Yeah, of course.
So he would basically introduce Glenn Burke as our faggot.
Oh my God.
And it just became like this was a guy in the prime of his physical life, just getting beat down constantly. And he would have, his family would have people over. Sorry, he would have people over for the holidays, and it would be other gay men who didn't have a family, who were abandoned. And his family never obviously turned on him. And so they would welcome him over for holidays and everything else. And, eventually he quit. Like he couldn't take it anymore. And, what happens when you're in that situation, when you're alone, and especially, in that time, in that era, you maybe get into a little bit of casual drug use, which he did. What at the HIV virus at some point is something that he picked up, and eventually died of AIDS. But he was the picture. He was the first real example, at least in baseball. There's probably another one, David Kopay, in football, who was out, and it showed you what the world would do right at that time. And if anybody knew the story of Glenn Burke and was closeted in professional sports, why would they want to come out? It literally killed him. And so that is and that history is something that people don't know. Right now, if you were to ask people Glenn Burke, they'd probably feel like they're impressing you by telling you, hey, that's the guy who invented the high five. They credited him with inventing the high five.
Right.
That's the least interesting part of his life.
Right.
And I can't wait for that to be common information for a lot of people.
I hope you tell that story. I'm going to come back to this article because there's a line in there that I want to come back to, but I know you're a basketball guy, obviously, as a sports reporter. And Michael Jordan, during this pandemic, they came out with his, the 10-part series on him. And I want to go to the eighth episode, last part of the eighth episode, where he got emotional. And he said, leadership has a price and winning has a price. And he got emotional. Only time during the whole 10-part series that I saw him emotional. But I want to take it back to this whole issue of coming out. Last week I was re-listening to an episode of Howard Stern that was taped during the pandemic with Anderson Cooper. And Cooper talked about Tim Cook, the guy who arguably leads the most valuable company in the entire planet with hundreds of thousands of employees, talks to the media on a regular basis. And he called Anderson Cooper to understand how to navigate the process of coming out. So in 90, so Glenn Burke dies virtually, with his sister and his family, around him, but still in a very tough spot, in a very lonely place in the middle of the 90s. And Israel, you went through this just years ago, a few years back. Have we really evolved that much? If Tim Cook's calling Anderson Cooper, and are we that progressive? Have we come that far, or do we have still a long, long way to go?
The short answer is that, right? We still have a long way to go. I think there's a couple. The first thing you mentioned there with the Michael Jordan, and this is where I can bring these two together here.
Yeah.
Is that leadership does come at a cost, right? There's a price for it. And so and I can only speak for me, but I'm saying for us, and I'll just speak for the LGBT community, but like for us, right? I can navigate my own life. I did it closeted, I was successful at it. I did not have to address my minority status as an LGBT person who, whatever percentage of people in this country and the world thinks of me lesser.
Right.
I didn't have to really do that. And this is where I think sort of the leadership thing, comes with a price. So you take accountability for yourself at one point. If you come out and you say, all right, I can deal with me, and whatever, daggers come my way, I can fend them off. I'll deal with me. But if you've done that, right, and I happen to be fortunate enough to do that with a safety net, with a lot of people around me, with a career already in hand. But if you do that and then say, man, like, I don't want this to happen to other people. Like, if I have a child that ends up being LGBT and all of a sudden like they have to go through the same things, and what was the point of me going through it, right? And so that's where it says leadership comes with a price. And so I said this after I came out, and to anybody who would listen, my bosses, whatever, that if people want to pigeonhole me as the gay sports reporter or I'm fine with that. That's more important to me. What happens at the end of my career, my life, in that area and helping other people means more to me than, slightly entertaining people in the sports field. And so I think that when I say that comes with a price, is it really does. Like I could sit here and just worry about myself, or I can, try to make a movie about, try to make a documentary about it, which is part of the project that I was telling you about. Or I could, and not to get too behind the scenes on stuff, but where I can fight, for certain things within a company, within an organization, within anything really. And so when you take on that burden for other people as well, it can be draining. But you also have to think, a couple of things. One, the good fortune that I happen to have had to be in this position without a lot of sort of scarring, right? But also just that, I want to do that. And I want, I love, I have a lot of children in my family. I don't have any myself, but my sisters all do, my cousins do. And I've always grew up around kids, and just, it's always been this idea of you just want what's better. You want life for them to be better than it was for you. And that's all I can think of. Like I had, this is probably TMI, but I had a niece recently come out to me, and, that was heavy stuff. And like, it's one of those deals where it's just like, am I going to even do enough to make her life better in her lifetime? And so, yeah, to wrap that up.
Did she come out to you first to help her navigate the process, or was it a family deal?
She technically told her mother first, but she told her mother with the idea of, hey, I want to talk to, they call me Helito. I want to talk to Helito about this. And so, yeah, that was, it was a heavy situation. And it just, it made me realize that, I wish I would have had that.
Right.
Or would have had the ability to be able to say that to someone at that age. But also that, yeah, it just comes with a responsibility. And, I'll be more than happy to just open people's eyes. And when you say like, how much farther do we have to go? Well, I don't know if I'm going to see a resolution that I would like in my lifetime. So it's going to be a long time, but it's going to be a long time when basically, if you just break it down and boil it down to the essentials of the argument, it's going to be real life versus religion, and the centuries and centuries and centuries of background and resume that religion has. And you're not going to win that argument. And so it can't be an argument. It's got to be a clarification. And so I think a lot of the responsibility, frankly, falls on leaders in religion and leaders in government to say, hey, maybe we haven't seen this properly and we've followed this down a road that we shouldn't have. Let's try to clarify, whether it be a translation of the Bible. That's something that you could do a deep dive on the internet and find several different translations on several different topics in the Bible. I happen to have done one on this topic and recognize that, hey, a lot of the issue is strictly translation. If you just go with what the consistencies are in that book, this is an anomaly. This is something that's different. And so, again, not to get bogged down in the details, you can do people can do the research on their own. But I think that's where the crux of the issue is just the belief cannot be stronger than the fact that, my life is real and not my choice. And so until we get to that understanding, I don't think we're even going to be on the same plane in terms of the conversation.
It's a great point. For our listeners and viewers who've just joined us, we've got Israel Gutierrez. He's a reporter, sports personality on ESPN, and you can find him all over the place. I just watched him today on Highly Questionable. I'm a huge fan, Israel. And if you want to find him, though, you can also find him at Mr. Is Gutierrez, or at Is Gutierrez on Twitter and on Instagram, Mr. Is Gutierrez. Putting those 2 points together that you just brought up on religion versus reality. Mm-hmm. In the Glenn Burke article in today's New York Times, the true story of Glenn Burke. I mean, the father Richard Purcell, when he eulogized him, said he died in truth. He told the truth. He didn't live a lie. And I believe the truth sets people free. You feel that way still?
Um, I do, because, it's been interesting just checking in with myself, the more of my truth that is revealed, right? So I came out personally in 2009 to my friends and family, and I could tell a shift in me. My friends could tell a shift in me. When I got back to when I got to ESPN at 2012, I had just started doing Around the Horn again that year, and I'd
Right.
stopped back in 2009, and so there was like a 3-year gap. And even on my first show back, Tony Reale, and I don't know if this was intended for me to hear, or whether he was talking to a producer and I overheard it, but he
Right.
was just saying how different I seemed and how much more confident I felt. And it's 100% true. And then, when I came out publicly again in 2015, it was another level. And I think right now, after a lot of just my personal, things that I've gone through, I now start to feel like what I imagine most, people my age, I'm 43, start to feel like. It's like, wow, like you're just starting to figure life out a little bit, right? And
True.
I think the more you speak your truth, the quicker you get to that point. The more you can sort of soak in and just compare yourself to others and just recognize your place in the world, um, and then just have a clearer view of things. Where I feel terrible saying that in the context of Glenn Burke, though, because it cost him his life.
Right.
And I don't know what, it's probably unfair to say, frankly, because who knows? He could have gotten HIV or AIDS, even if he wasn't, treated the way
Right.
he was,
Right.
by his. But you can't imagine that he would try to isolate, right? You can't imagine that he would feel so down. And frankly, the reason he got even worse health wise is because, and he'd been playing in the gay leagues, and it was just it was a source of life for him, because it was just like, wow, I can be myself out here and not have to worry about all these. And then one night randomly gets hit by a car, ruins his leg, can't play again. And so now it's just everything crashing upon him. I just can't imagine he would have had that luck if it would have been, hey, supportive while at work, stayed in the major leagues, didn't have to play in the gay leagues, wouldn't be, crossing the street at the time that he did. And who knows what would have happened. He could have been, a beloved person who, when he actually announced that he had HIV or AIDS, everybody would have rallied around him, and who knows what that would have resulted in. So
Right.
it's hard to say definitively without sort of with generally. You can't just
Right.
say, hey, the truth will set you free, because for some people, people aren't ready to hear that truth. And at the time,
Right.
that was certainly the case for Glenn Burke. And I don't know what situation we're talking about now, whether it be, somebody who, is their gender, somebody who's transgender and people don't understand. And then, who knows what path that takes them. So, in general, I believe in that saying, and I think it's the way to go. It's the way
Right.
toward progress. But sometimes, man, it's just, depending on the context you're talking about, it's not always true.
I hope your project that you referred to, Israel, does come out. I think there's going to be a lot of value to it if you can get that produced and get that out. I think there's a lot to it. When you think about, just as a sports reporter, what's the one get you want to get, that you haven't gotten yet? Who do you want to get? Who do you
um,
see like on television or playing in a sport or
yeah.
is doing something really different and you're just dying to get in front of that person?
So I kind of just want to spend a day with Serena Williams. It's really just curiosity, right? Everything about her life, from when she was a child till now, is wildly intriguing, and the way she carries herself and the way she's done everything has been very impressive. And I just kind of want to like be by the person for a little bit,
Yeah.
Um, I and this is more of an interview, not necessarily spend the day with, but and I'm probably gonna do this at some point.
Yeah.
Hopefully they're still together. Sue
Yeah.
Bird and Megan Rapinoe is a couple that I would
Wow.
like to talk to at this exact
Yeah.
at the same time. I was thinking about like representation growing up, right? And I mentioned Billy Bean, and I cannot imagine how awesome it is when you've got Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird, two lesbian women, hosting the ESPYs. Now, I know the ESPYs is kind of like a contrived award show, whatever, but it's been around for a long time. Like, there are people like in their 20s right now who know the ESPYs is just a regular award show. It's just part of the others, right?
Right.
Almost as much history as the Oscars. and you have them hosting it. Like, talk about like just normalizing, right? Like, they're two of the greatest sports figures of our time, but also just happen to be really likable people. And as a couple, here they are, just, presenting all these other amazing athletes to you. And it felt really, really cool. And I just, that's an interview that I feel like, in terms of groundbreaking, in terms of people who, just in the long term of the story, of our story, who's going to stand out to me. I mean, those two women definitely stand out to me, just not just for everything that they've done individually, but even that moment to me, it was just kind of a wow thing for me.
Tomorrow's the championship game of any sport you could choose: NHL, NBA, MLB, NFL, tennis, or the Masters. Where do you want to be?
Tomorrow. Wimbledon final.
Wimbledon final. Oh,
yeah. So it's basically the only event that's on my checklist that I haven't done yet.
Okay.
I did an Olympics in 2008, which was great, and it checked off a lot of boxes, mostly because I'm a huge volleyball fan. And the men went on a indoor run to gold, the women silver, and then you had Misty May and don't make me forget Chrissy. Oh God, Misty May and the Misty May trainer. I can even give you her full name, and I'm forgetting the other. Oh my God. Okay. Anyway, so the most popular women's volleyball beach duo ever. And I was a big fan of her when she was at Stanford too. Why her name has escaped me is driving me crazy. But so I got a lot of things checked off there, and the only thing that, like I said, tomorrow I would want on that list would be the Wimbledon final, or Wimbledon in general. So that's the answer you're getting today.
That's awesome. I love it. But 10 years from now, you're still very young. Obviously, the way you look, you're going to live to 120, as you said at the top of the show. So when you're 53, I'm interviewing you, and I'm a lot older, probably hopefully gray by then, so I look like you, good like you. What are you going to be doing? Like, what's your role going to be then? And how are you going to evolve your career?
So ideally, I would love to be done with the daily sports world, like in my early 50s, and just sort of moving on to sort of using, even if it's sports figures or what have you, as just a way to get information out there. And that's doing it through whatever it be, interviews and some of the stuff that I was talking about that I really like doing to begin with.
Yeah.
But and what I mean, you want to joke and say it's like a Roy Firestone situation or whatever.
Yeah.
I just want to talk to interesting people, okay, and just get little nuggets of information out there, or just thoughts that people don't think of every day. And I thought about this the other day too, because I don't want to get into detail on this, but I was basically explaining to someone why something would feel bad or be unfair to an LGBT person. Okay. Because, and the person that I was speaking to, you would think would recognize these things.
Yeah.
But he didn't. And so after me explaining to this person, it was very sort of eye-opening. Yeah. And so to him. And so that was one of the many reasons why I just think there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot we assume. And there's so much information, and there's so many ways to get it all, that I think we just assume too much. Like, a lot of times people mess up and say things that they're not supposed to say. And you realize that, we're all judging them and casting it. And it's just like, they haven't had time to think about that subject perfectly. I mean, especially when you talk about some of these professional athletes who have spent almost every minute of their day focusing on their craft and not really worrying about the outside world so much. And so maybe they slip up on the lesson, you're not supposed to say that word, and it's still teachable, right? But if all these things are just sort of out there and accessible more often, and you get personalities that people recognize and just to talk about it, then it's in your brain. You can sort of download it and register it all, and then down the road you won't use an offensive slur, or you won't treat somebody a certain way. And so that's basically what I can see myself doing, sort of just dropping in and doing some interviews, doing some podcasts, doing something with people who are like either underrepresented or have a little bit of an underdog story, or just anything that's that's just sort of heartfelt and unique. Cause I think that's where, people, I mentioned Roy Firestone, and you think of like a Tom Rinaldi or something when you think
Yeah.
of like the heartfelt stuff. And
Yeah.
and yeah, I get it. Like it's a soft voice and it's a great delivery and it's a soothing story. But I think just really getting to the real heart of a lot of people, everyday people, in sports, I think that's probably where I just want to be. I just want to open up sort of the lines of emotion and sensitivity when it comes to just this animal that we call the sports world. And so, however that manifests itself, whether it be me, doing occasional interviews for, interview shows or having my own, content
Right.
network or what have you. That's kind of what I would love to do. Outside of that, probably just throw some money in real estate and not really have to work very hard the second half of the 120 years.
Are you going to stay down? I know you're a Gator, and I know you're down in Florida now. Are you going to end up staying in Florida, or are you going to look to change venues down the road?
I'm down. I'm down to move. I love South Florida because it's where I grew up. I've been down here since I was 2 years old.
Yeah.
The weather, we get about 2 weeks of winter and then it's summer the rest of the time. And I've gotten used to that. I kind of enjoy it. I could definitely move though. I just got a lot of family here.
Yeah.
All those nieces and nephews I was talking about and sisters, they're all here. So it would have to be something really important to sort of pull me away from here.
What's happening with your old crew? With I miss you and the crew on Dan Le Batard and Stugatz.
Yeah.
When are you guys all coming back together? I'm dying for give me an exclusive.
Well,
here.
I mean, honestly, like if I were to answer that question, it'd probably be a breach of contract.
I know.
I
I
don't think I'm allowed to talk to that
No,
company,
I know,
but
I know.
It's interesting to watch. I know,
Yeah.
ESPN's a little bit less joyful without him, or without them.
Yeah.
But I just love the idea of, and it might not be an ESPN place, but the idea of just bringing your friends together and talking, like that's kind of what we do in sports,
I know.
And so the way they've kind of, and Dan Patrick did that as well with the Danettes, but the way they've done that, it was just fantastic. And I really hope, I just really hope I can still hear it for a long time, whether or not I'm part of it. Like I've sort of I interject my voice into a lot of the conversations anyway, and nobody needs to hear what I had to say necessarily, but it would just it's just a fun group, and I think I'm just lucky because I can, if I really needed to, just invite any of them over and just
That's
probably not
cool.
these days, but
That's cool.
just hang out. And so eventually, who knows if we'll ever be on the air together again, but I feel like they'll always be a part of my life.
Yeah, I hope so, because you guys are all great together. It's always great to watch you with them and them with you. Israel,
Thanks.
I'm going to give you the final call here. I know we have a little bit of a hard stop, and I want to be sensitive to time and everything like that. But I want to give you the final word, and I want to thank you again for coming on today and being so open and true to everyone about yourself and about some of your thoughts on some of the most important topics that are out there today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And again, thanks for having me on. And most of the time, I just say yes to any sort of interview because I feel like, in large part, if they're getting to know me, then we can sort of veer off into some other topics. So I really appreciate you sort of hitting the ones that I feel like really matter to me. Whether I didn't ask you to, so I appreciate it. And yeah, just look, I think what we've got going here in sports media right now is just a real cool sort of melding of personalities, right? But also just how do you want to call this? So I consider Dan Le Batard, when I grew up, he was grew up meaning like from my 15, 16-year-old going on. I kind of considered him, and this is going to sound crazy, my conscience. Because I always thought, I was like, well, I mean, I read him and I knew him a little bit, and I'm just like, man, like it was almost like, what would Dan do in this situation? And I tried not to like emulate him in terms of writing or everything else, because that's impossible, but just in terms of just decisions in the real world. And as I mentioned earlier, like I never felt like I was sort of fully formed because I hadn't gone through the all normal things that most kids go through, the relationship part of life, the breakups and the personal stuff. Like that really wasn't part of my life. So I just kind of looked to others a lot. And I feel like we have that in sports media right now. If you really wanted to, you could just create a collection of people that are going to give you amazing sports information, and they're going to entertain you a little bit, but they're also going to be a little bit of like just a little bit of a direction, a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of hey, we know this is a good group of people. And if we learn a little bit from them, I think we'll all be a little bit better. And I only say that because of, the people who reach out and ask these questions and are very thankful about that. And so if people weren't interested in us and what we were outside of our jobs, then, we wouldn't get questions like that. So I think, hopefully that's just kind of where we're at right now. And, the little brat pack at ESPN, and hopefully it doesn't get broken up too much more. And, we can all have sort of grow up together, if you will, in this industry.
And it's fun watching you all together. I'll tell you all it's actually really fun. And you made sports journalism something it wasn't years ago. It was a little more stuffy in the days that I grew up with Howard Cosell and Dick Schaap and all those legends. And now you guys have made it really fun. I mean,
there's a place for all of that. Like, I don't want people to just think that, it's just going to be a bunch of clowns trying to make everybody laugh. Like, I was on the Sports Reporters for, almost a decade, and it felt stuffier, but it felt necessary too, because on a Sunday morning, you just want to, hash it all out and not have to worry about having to crack somebody up. So I think there's a place for all of it. And fortunately, I'm a part of a group that sees that, and, you can sort of balance it out and play both sides if you want.
For our listeners and viewers, to find Israel Gutierrez, it's Mr. Is Gutierrez on Instagram, and it's Is Gutierrez on Twitter. Israel, you've inspired me. You've inspired our listeners and our viewers. Thank you for doing what you do. You're constantly making positive impact in this planet. I know you're making the world a better place, and you're always welcome back on the Impact Podcast. Thanks again.
I mean, I feel like there's plenty more to say. So whenever you want me back, just hit me up.
You're going to be back. Take care. This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by The Marketing Masters. The Marketing Masters is a boutique marketing agency offering website development and digital marketing services to small and medium businesses across America. For more information on how they can help you grow your business online, please visit themarketingmasters.com.